A widow stands alone, hammer in hand, her cabin half built and the snow rising. Folks in Cold Hollow say she's foolish, but Luke Tanner, a grieving cowboy, sees more than pride in her eyes. He sees the same fight that once kept him breathing. When a blizzard threatens to rip it all down, he rides in with rope and nails, saving her home in silence. Then come the whispers. Then comes the rival who wants her land. And the town that once buried his name starts digging up hers. Will one man's quiet courage be enough, or will mercy cost more than either can pay? Each morning, Luke Tanner rode the ridgeline in silence. The wind up there was sharp, colder than the valley, but it suited him. He wasn't a man for words anymore, not since the pines took his wife and child in a spring flood 2 years back. He kept to his land, ran his cattle, patched fence lines, and slept light in a house that never warmed. Today, the ridge held something new. Below, in a cut of cleared trees near the bluff, a woman stood bracing a beam against the wind. She was half buried in snow, stubborn as stone, her frame bent against the weight of the storm. Nails clamped between her lips, hammer in hand. Clara Vaughn, the widow folks whispered about in town. Luke reined in, watched. She was building a cabin, alone. The ridge howled, lifting snow like dust off a wagon trail. Her ladder swayed, a beam cracked. She didn't flinch. He turned his horse and rode back home, jaw tight. That night, the wind worsened. Gusts hammered Luke's shutters. Snow packed against the door like sand against a seawall. He poured coffee, stared into the stove, and cursed under his breath. Fool woman. Damn fool. By midnight, he saddled his mare. He rode into the white with rope, tarps, nails, and a crowbar. Didn't knock, just stepped into the storm and braced the sagging frame with what he had. She saw him, eyes wide, face raw from wind. "I didn't ask," she said over the howl. "I didn't answer," he muttered, driving a nail into the beam. Together, they tied tarp over rafters, anchored joists, and kicked snow from the flooring. His hands bled where the rope tore skin. She worked beside him, lips cracked, quiet and unshaken. Before dawn, the walls stood straighter. The roof held. He nodded once and turned to go. "Wait," she called. He stopped, back to her. "Thank you," she said, voice breaking just a little. He didn't answer, just tipped his hat against the wind and rode down the ridge. By morning, Cold Hollow buzzed. "Luke Tanner spent the night in a widow's half-built shack?" sneered Mrs. Templeton, mouth puckered tighter than a drawstring purse. "Wasn't just weather he was checking," Cal Rowe added, smirking behind a whiskey glass. At the general store, eyes followed Luke as he passed. A chuckle here, a cough there. He paid no mind, didn't explain himself. That was the thing about silence. It left room for folks to fill in their own lies. But the ridge remembered. The cabin stood. That evening, Luke checked. His cattle, his fences, his boots. All fine. Still, he saddled again, rode up the bluff, and looked down. She was splitting kindling. The cabin roof held. Smoke curled from the pipe he'd patched with spare tin. She glanced up, met his eyes, didn't wave, didn't look away either. He rode home with something strange in his chest, like sorrow had shifted shape, left a space where it used to sit. Below the ridge, in the shadows, Cal Rowe watched them both. He rubbed the corner of a folded paper between his fingers and smiled like a man who just found a loose nail in a neighbor's fence. There'd be no need for a hammer. Snow softened the edges of Cold Hollow, but it couldn't cover sharp tongues. By Sunday, every pew in the clapboard church seemed to creak with judgment. The hymn book pages rustled like whispers. When Clara Vaughn stepped inside with wind-chapped hands and a patched shawl, Mrs. Templeton's gaze followed her like a hawk shadowing a rabbit. "She's building sin with hammer and nails," the older woman muttered, loud enough for 3 rows to hear. Clara didn't flinch. She took her seat in the back, as she always did, head held just high enough not to break. 2 pews ahead, Cal Rowe leaned back, arms draped over the bench like a man without shame. His coat was too fine for a rancher, his smile too smooth. When the final amen was spoken, he didn't walk out. He waited. "Ma'am," he said to Clara just outside the chapel steps, "might be best you consider selling that ridge. Land's too exposed for a woman alone. I'd pay fair." Luke Tanner watched from the edge of the crowd. He saw Clara's jaw tighten before she spoke. "I didn't build my life for someone else to finish," she said, turning her back. Cal's smile thinned. The next morning, Luke was back at the ridge. He didn't ask. She didn't thank him. But they worked, shoulder to shoulder, boot to frostbitten boot. Together they lifted beams, squared the window frame, fitted shingles. By dusk, the little stove inside was warm enough to thaw their fingers. Clara stirred a pot of stew while Luke rubbed snow from his sleeves. "You ever build one before?" she asked, eyes on the pot. "Built two," he said. "One didn't make it through the spring floods." She glanced up, her look careful. He nodded. "My wife and the child didn't make it either." Silence settled like snow on roof lines. She didn't offer pity, just ladled stew into two chipped bowls. After a while she spoke. "My husband left bruises like footprints," she said. "He drank before noon, preached after dark." Luke stared into his stew. "I'm sorry." "He's gone now." Died with a full flask and an empty saddle. Luke didn't ask how. He just said, "You deserve better." The next morning, half the timber stack was gone, boot prints tracked away into the brush. Luke followed them through the wind-polished snow. The prints were wide, 2, maybe 3 men hauling sleds. They led straight to Cal Rowe's sawmill. The timber was there, already half sawn, some still bearing Clara's burned initials. Luke stood at the edge of the yard, fists cold and clenched. Rowe's men lounged by the fire pit, smirking. "Just business," one muttered as Luke passed. He didn't reply, didn't make a scene, but inside, something locked into place. Back at the cabin, Clara sat on the stoop, hat pulled low, staring at the splintered pile. "They think I won't fight back," she said. Luke crouched beside her. "You shouldn't have to fight alone." She turned to him, her voice low. "You'll catch fire, standing too close to me." He reached down, picked up a half-burnt board, and said, "Then I'll just carry the water, too." The snow picked up again that night, dusting the ridge and the lumber yard below, but Luke Tanner didn't sleep. He sat by the cabin window, watching the moonlight glint off the blade of his axe, counting boards, planning steps, and wondering how long decency could stay quiet before it needed to speak. And across town, Cal Rowe poured himself another drink, flipped through a folded deed contract, and smiled like a man who'd already counted someone else's losses as his gain. The wind bit sharper as December clawed through the Montana territory. Snow fell less like feathers and more like thrown grit, sideways, relentless, whispering warnings in every gust. But Luke Tanner wasn't listening to the weather. He was listening to timber, and the story the stolen logs told was plain. He crouched beside the half-stripped stack he'd hauled back from Rowe's mill under cover of fog. His gloved fingers traced the faint brand marks, CV, singed at the ends, burned clean with a smith's rod. No question, they were Clara's. The logs were proof enough to raise hell, but Luke didn't want to raise hell. He wanted to build something, a cabin, a life, maybe even a chance at peace. So he needed something stronger than fury. He needed law. Luke rode down to the edge of Cold Hollow as dusk gathered like coal smoke. He tied his horse at the back of the old hardware store, looped through the alley, and stepped through the side door of Rowe's sawmill office. The place smelled like cedar oil and dishonesty. Piles of freight ledgers sat haphazard on the desk, open to inflated shipments and missing returns. Luke scanned quickly, freight logs listing goods received from properties that hadn't even cleared homestead status. His eyes narrowed. A folded slip poked from beneath a cracked inkwell. He slid it free, careful not to smudge the names. It was a pre-purchase agreement, Cal Rowe's signature, dated 2 weeks before the public land registry had opened that parcel of ridge. Illegal, plain and cold. Luke copied it word for word into a small notebook he kept in his coat's inner pocket. When he stepped back out into the cold, he looked up at the ridge. The stars were dull behind frost haze, but one thing burned clear. If Rowe's land deal was based on that agreement, the whole claim was poison. He returned to Clara's cabin just before dawn, breath, steaming, notebook sealed in wax. Clara was already splitting kindling by lantern light. "Didn't expect you back before sunup," she said without looking up. He handed her the sealed envelope. "Keep it. It's leverage." She set the axe down and wiped her brow. "What is it?" "Something that makes Rowe nervous." She studied him in the half-light, her expression unreadable. "I don't want a war," she said. Luke nodded. "Neither do I, but I won't let you lose what you've bled for." She turned away, rubbing her hands. "And what about the cost? People already think I'm a fool. Now they'll think I'm using a man to fight my battles. You're not using me, he said. I'm offering. Silence stretched between them, long as winter. Finally, Clara took the envelope and set it beneath a loose floorboard near the hearth. If it comes to it, she said, I'll read it aloud myself. Luke smiled faintly. Fair enough. Later that day, he met Reverend Booth at the circuit clerk's temporary desk near the mercantile. The Reverend signed the witness page as Luke copied the contract's details again. Every number, every misstep, every illegal claim. Why now? The Reverend asked gently. You've been quiet a long while. Luke shrugged. A man's voice doesn't matter until he knows what he stands for. The Reverend folded the paper and nodded. May the truth warm someone's hearth, not burn it. Luke tipped his hat. As he left town, he spotted Cal Rowe on the porch of the saloon, laughing with Mrs. Templeton over a mug of mulled wine. Rowe's eyes locked onto Luke's. The smile froze a fraction. He knew something had shifted. Not enough to act, not yet, but enough to worry. The kind of worry that eats a man's sleep. Luke didn't break stride. He rode slow, deliberate, like a man building more than just a cabin, like a man building intent. Cold Hollow's town council met in the church basement that week. Chairs scraped into a loose half-circle like a trial without a judge. Snow tracked in under boots, melting into the wood floor. Lamplight flickered across damp coats and watchful eyes. Luke Tanner stood at the back, arms crossed, boots wet from the ride. Clara Vaughn sat alone near the front, hands folded tight in her lap, her face calm but pale. She wore no bonnet, no shawl to soften her shoulders, just a simple work dress, dusted in sawdust and pride. Across from her, Cal Rowe lounged like a man who already knew the ending. Mrs. Templeton cleared her throat. I raise concern over the legitimacy of the Ridge homestead, she said, voice syrupy but sharp. A woman alone, with no visible means of support, squatting on county land, and rumors that her protector, her glance slid toward Luke, is filing papers on her behalf. Possibly, fraudulently gasps and murmurs followed. A few heads turned to Luke. Sheriff Doolin, always tired and cautious, raised a palm. Let's keep it civil. Cal stood, waving a folded paper. I've here a debt note owed to Cold Hollow Mercantile, signed and witnessed. She can't pay, so I've offered to take her claim, salvage what I can, before winter does worse. Clara's jaw tightened. I never signed any such thing, she said. Mrs. Templeton sniffed. Then perhaps the gentleman forged it. Laughter bubbled uneasily. Luke's hand drifted toward his coat pocket, where a copy of Rowe's pre-purchase contract lay, inked and witnessed. But Clara turned slightly, catching his eye. Her look was clear. Not yet. Not like this. The council chair, an old man with clouded eyes, tapped his gavel. Due to the dispute, a formal hearing set for 2 weeks. Let the judge decide. The gavel fell. Rowe smiled. Outside, the air was sharp with pine and tension. Clara walked straight to her mare, adjusting the saddle girth. Luke followed, footsteps careful. You should have let me speak, he said softly. She swung up into the saddle without looking at him. And make it worse? Let them call me your charity project, your pity bride. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. Luke stepped back, jaw set. I did it to protect you. Did I ask for that? Wind whipped through the trees, scattering brittle pine needles like dry rain. She looked down at him, tired and fierce. You think silence is strength, but so is standing beside someone when it costs you. He swallowed hard. I wasn't trying to save you, Clara. I was trying to keep the fight clean. On your terms. She studied him a long moment, then nodded once, curt. That's the first honest thing you've said. And she rode off into the early dusk, cloak trailing behind like smoke. Back at his place, Luke stared at the sealed envelope in his drawer. The one with Rowe's forged contract and Clara's initials, burned into the wood samples from the stolen logs. He thought of his late wife, of how long he'd worn guilt like armor, of how pride, false or not, had kept him from reaching for something real again. He closed the drawer, not yet, but soon. For now, he'd stack what wood he had, ready the tarps, and wait for the storm he knew was coming, because Cold Hollow wasn't done testing them, and neither was he. By the time the frost lifted the next morning, Luke Tanner had made his choice. He didn't saddle his horse. He didn't ride to the ridge. Instead, he walked down to the notary's office with the forged contract in one hand and Clara Vaughn's legal land coordinates in the other. The clerk, Mr. Halberd, looked up from his tea, brows raised. You sure you want this filed under her name? Luke nodded once. Quietly. Let the judge have it before the hearing. Mr. Halberd peered at the paper, then at Luke. You understand this puts you in the crosshairs, not her. Luke let out a slow breath. I've lived in the crosshairs a long time. When he left the office, snowflakes were falling soft as dust. He didn't look back. That evening, he rode out to Clara's ridge with a crate of fresh nails, a sack of oats, and 2 planks carved to fit the gable joints she'd been struggling with. Her. Door opened before he could knock. You filed it, she said. No question. Luke held still. I did. Clara's eyes, gray like riverstone, didn't soften. Not this time. You did it behind my back. Again. It was to keep you safe. She stepped forward, boots crunching in the frost. No. It was to quiet your own guilt. Luke's jaw tensed. That's not fair. Isn't it? Her voice didn't rise, but the air between them snapped taut. You think I don't know what people say about me? That I'm too proud to take charity? Too stubborn to be helped without cost? I chose to stay and fight, Luke, on my feet. You took that choice from me. He reached for the crate of nails. Wordless, she stepped back inside. Take your lumber. Take your help, but leave me my name. The door shut. Luke stood in the falling snow for a long time before turning toward town. That night, the ridge cabin sat quiet, the hearth unlit. And at dawn, the debt men came, 2 of them. Sharp-jawed, cold-eyed, hired by Cal Rowe. They carried a writ, signed by Rowe's banker cousin, claiming repayment for advanced goods and services. Clara had no such account, but the law in Cold Hollow bent easily. They took her cross-cut saw, her tools, 3 fresh-cut beams, and the barrel of nails Luke had left behind. She stood on the porch, arms folded, face blank. Not a word passed her lips. Mrs. Templeton watched from a buggy nearby, her smile brittle as frost. The townsfolk looked away. No one stepped forward. No one, except old Ben. Later that evening, Luke found himself at the edge of Vidun, hat in hand, ready to ride west for good. He'd packed light, left his cabin key with the church steward. He didn't plan to return, but as he turned toward his horse, a bootstep crunched behind him. Running again? Old Ben's voice was gravel and fire. Luke didn't answer. Ben walked closer, lantern swinging low. You can rope a steer in a lightning storm, but you can't rope your own courage when it counts? Luke turned. I tried. I made it worse. Ben jabbed a finger at his chest. No, boy. You tried to fix it alone. And that ain't courage. That's just pride wearing a different coat. Luke looked down at his saddlebag. What if she never forgives me? Ben gave a tired smile. Then you keep showing up till you deserve it. He shoved a package into Luke's chest. A tin of nails, a folded note, and a wood-carved heart. Start there. Luke nodded, silent. This time, when he rode out of town, it wasn't to leave anything behind. It was to finish what he'd started. And maybe start something new. Cold Hollow's main street held its breath as Luke Tanner marched toward the bank. He hadn't shaved, he hadn't slept. But his stride was firm, jaw clenched, boots echoing sharp against the boardwalk. Snow fell in slow spirals, silent witnesses to a man finally done running from himself. He swung open the oak door to Rowe and Finch Mercantile and stepped inside. Cal Rowe looked up from his desk, smirking. Well, if it ain't the ridge-roaming carpenter. Come to buy back the nails you left behind? Luke held up the forged contract. This ends now. Rowe's grin widened. You sure you want to make this official, Tanner? You're already the talk of the town. All this huffing and puffing for a woman who wants nothing to do with you. Behind him, the banker, a cousin of Rowe's, stood from his stool, folding his arms. Luke dropped the paper on the counter. Fraudulent land purchase, filed with the circuit judge, already sealed. The banker raised an eyebrow. You accusing Mr. Rowe of fraud? I'm showing proof. Cal's smirk twisted. Then let's hear it from the sheriff. And within minutes, Luke found himself in the middle of the street, surrounded by townsfolk drawn by whispers and wind. Sheriff Edler, gray-eyed and cautious, took the paper and studied it. Cal leaned in. This man's interfering with legal land claims. Filing under another person's name without consent. That's misrepresentation at best. Fraud at worst. Luke kept his voice low. I did it to protect her. She was being targeted. The sheriff looked torn, shifting his weight. Then Cal dropped the final blow. "Sheriff, you've no choice. Until this is sorted by the judge, you gotta detain him." For process violation, Edler sighed and nodded. "I'm sorry, Luke. You'll sit in the cell till the judge rides through next week." The iron door clicked shut. Luke sat on the cot, the weight of silence pressing on his shoulders harder than the bars. He stared at the worn photo in his hand, his late wife, their unborn child's name scrawled in pencil behind it. He'd come to Cold Hollow to forget that pain. Now it had led him to repeat it. The sun dipped, cold crept in. Somewhere outside, boots crunched on snow. Then came her voice. "You lied to me." Clara stood beyond the bars, arms folded, face unreadable. Luke stood. "I didn't lie. You kept secrets to play savior. That's worse." He winced. "I was trying to protect you." "I don't need a protector, Luke. I needed a partner. Someone who would stand beside me, not ahead of me." She turned to leave. "Clara," she stopped, but didn't turn. "You say you did it for me, but it feels like you did it for yourself, to feel useful again." Then she was gone. The door closed behind her with a finality louder than any jail lock. The moon rose. Luke sat in the dim light, alone, hands wrapped around the old flask old Ben had passed to him through the bars earlier that evening. On it, etched in iron, "Stand or fall, but face it." He'd been wrong, not for defending Clara, but for thinking he could do it without letting her in. That his strength alone was the answer. Truth was, pride had kept him from trusting her strength too. He let out a shaky breath, stood, and whispered into the night, "Help me get this right." An hour before dawn, the key slid across the floor. Luke looked up. Old Ben's craggy face grinned from the hallway. "Sheriff's out cold. He's not looking to press charges unless someone makes a fuss." Luke stood, stunned. Ben tipped his hat. "Redemption's waiting on a ridge, son." "Snow's falling fast. Don't let it cover your chance." Luke slipped the key into the lock. It turned easy. So did his heart. He saddled up in the dark and rode north, toward the ridge, toward forgiveness, toward her. The sun hadn't yet cleared the ridgeline when Luke Tanner rode up the narrow trail, heart pounding harder than his gelding's hooves. The wind had calmed, but the world still held its breath. Clara's cabin came into view, half-walled, roof tarps flapping weakly in the morning light. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin and uncertain, but no movement stirred outside. Luke dismounted, boots sinking into snow crust. He called out softly, "Clara?" No answer. He stepped up onto the porch, found the door half ajar. Inside, the stove glowed faint orange. She lay curled on a cot near the hearth, wrapped in a patched quilt, cheeks pale and hollow. Her right wrist was bandaged with torn linen. Luke dropped to his knees beside her. "Clara," he whispered. Her eyes opened slowly, dry, dull. He poured water from the kettle and helped her drink, then sat back, unsure what words would mend what pride had broken. "I brought something," he said quietly, pulling the folded contract from his coat. "This is the paper Roe used to steal your land. It's invalid now. Judge knows it." She stared, then whispered, "Why now?" He looked away. "Because I was a fool before. Thought protecting you meant doing things alone. Truth is, I was just scared. Of needing someone again." Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. He gently pressed the paper into her hand. "This land's yours." Every inch, a sharp crack split the stillness outside. They both turned. Another, then hooves. Luke moved to the window. 3 riders, Roe at the lead, rifle across his saddle. 2 hired guns flanked him, hard-eyed and grinning. Luke stood tall. "Stay inside." She sat up, weak but clear. "Don't go out there." Alone, he paused, then nodded once. Together they stepped onto the porch. Roe pulled up short. "Well, look who dusted off his pride," he sneered. "Back to play nursemaid?" Luke didn't flinch. "You're trespassing." Roe's rifle raised an inch. "And you're harboring land under false claim." "Judge ain't ruled yet." Luke's voice stayed calm. "That contract's been filed. The judge's clerk will confirm by noon." Roe spat. "You always were the quiet kind. Thought you could hide behind planks and papers." The hired man to his right leveled a pistol toward Clara. Luke stepped forward. "She's under my protection." Roe laughed. "That's mighty noble. But nobility don't mean squat when you ain't got bullets behind it." Luke reached into his coat. Roe twitched, rifle ready, but Luke didn't pull a gun. He held up the ledger. Roe stiffened. Luke said, "Town'll see it soon. Pages signed by your own hand. Dates. timber movement, proof you sold land you didn't own. The second gunman cursed under his breath. Rose's smirk faltered. Behind Luke, Clara's voice rang clear. You want this ridge? Then come take it, but you'll do it before witnesses down the slope. Riders crested the trail. Old Ben, the blacksmith, Sheriff Edler, even Mrs. Templeton, lips tight with disapproval, but present. Rose's men shifted uneasily. The sheriff rode forward, stopped between the cabin and the threat. He looked at Roe. You'll stand down. We have filings from Tanner, and the circuit judge wired back this morning. You've lost your claim. Rose's knuckles whitened on his reins. Take one more step, Edler warned, and you're adding armed threat to land fraud. Rose's hand hovered over his rifle. Luke didn't move. I won't draw, he said softly. Not for you. Not today. Silence fell. Snow ticked against leather and wood. Then the gunman lowered his pistol. Roe turned, face like stone, and rode off without a word. The others followed. The porch held still. Clara reached for Luke's hand. He took it. Behind them, the town began to dismount. Voices called out, soft but steady. Ben chuckled. Told you. Redemption's waitin' on a ridge. Luke exhaled for the first time in days. Not because it was over, but because he wasn't alone anymore. By the time Luke and Clara reached Cold Hollow's main street, word had already spread like sparks on dry grass. Folks lined the wooden sidewalks, some arms crossed, others curious, a few ashamed. Snowmelt dripped from overhangs, and the judge's clerk, a young man in wire spectacles, stood beside Sheriff Edler, holding a leather satchel thick with paperwork. Cal Roe's horse clattered into the street, his face red with fury. Behind him, his two hired men trailed uneasily. They hadn't expected the town to gather. They sure hadn't expected Clara Vaughn standing tall beside Luke Tanner, her bandaged wrist visible, her chin lifted like a flag in wind. You think you won? Roe barked, reins jerking. Think a cabin and a few signatures make a claim, Sheriff? Edler didn't move. Clerk arrived just after sunrise. Judge's ruling is clear. He opened the satchel and pulled out a sealed envelope, unfolding it slow and deliberate. Roe's pre-purchase filings are illegal. His claim on the Vaughn parcel is nullified. Further, the court recognizes fraudulent activity tied to his mill receipts. A murmur rose from the crowd. Mrs. Templeton, wrapped in her fur collar, shifted uncomfortably. The blacksmith crossed his arms. Old Ben chuckled without hiding it. Roe scoffed, dismounted, and stepped forward. This is a witch hunt. A broken-down cattleman and a stubborn widow don't get to rewrite the law. Luke met him halfway. No one rewrote anything. You just gambled folks wouldn't notice the fine print. Clara's voice followed, clear and steady. And that no one would stand beside a woman alone. Roe's glare darkened, but the sheriff stepped between them. You're free to challenge it, Edler said, but you'll be doing so from town limits. Judge E. ordered your removal from Vaughn Ridge until the review's complete. You've lost your hold. Roe turned, wild-eyed, seeking sympathy from the faces around him, but the crowd had shifted. The teacher, Miss Ayers, now stood by Clara. The blacksmith tipped his hat to Luke. Even the general store owner muttered, "About time someone spoke plain." Luke stepped forward one last time. You made your living twisting weakness into gain. But you picked the wrong ridge. Roe drew breath to spit a retort. But the clerk raised another paper. One more item, he added. Ledger pages submitted show land pre-sales made by Roe to 3 other claimants before legal entitlement, including property marked under Mrs. Vaughn's initials. That stunned even the quiet ones. Roe went pale. You can't prove. I can, came a voice from the rear. Old Ben stepped forward, pulling a battered satchel from under his coat. He dropped it to the boardwalk with a thud. Inside, pages, ledgers, receipts, even maps. I kept copies, Ben said simply, just in case a snake ever tried to bite twice. The final blow didn't land with shouting or fists, but with silence. Sheriff Edler gave Roe a long look. You can ride out, or be escorted. Your choice. Roe stood stiff, jaw twitching. Then he turned, mounted without a word, and rode south down the thawing road. No one followed. The crowd shifted again, not toward Roe, but toward Luke and Clara. Mrs. Templeton stepped forward, lips pursed. Miss Vaughn, I may have misjudged. Clara held her gaze. We all did. Then Sefter, but Cold Hollow can still build right things. If it chooses to, A ripple of nods followed, then movement. The blacksmith slapped Luke's shoulder. "Got some spare nails if you're still framing," the teacher added, "and a kettle if you ever get that stove working again." That night, back on the ridge, Luke and Clara watched as lanterns bobbed up the trail, neighbors carrying planks, saws, and baskets of food. No grand speeches, just quiet steps and second chances. She leaned against him, worn but glowing. "You think we can finish before spring?" she asked. Luke glanced at the rising moon. "With help like this," he smiled, "we just might build more than a cabin." And behind them, the first tulip bulb poked through the snow by the porch. The ridge never sounded so alive. For 3 straight days, hammers echoed off the snowy pines, saws sang through timber, and boots stomped the packed earth as neighbors, once silent, now steady, framed out the last walls of Clara Vaughn's cabin. Luke Tanner moved among them like he'd been born to that role. He didn't give orders, didn't boast. Just passed beams, drove nails, fetched water. And every so often, when she wasn't looking, his eyes would rest on Clara with something softer than pride, something like hope. Clara, wrist still stiff but spirit unbent, worked alongside them. She stitched curtains, patched bedding, and stood watch as young Jesse Sims tacked down roof shingles, crooked. "Straighten that line, son," she called gently, "unless you want snow pouring in on your toes." Laughter followed, the kind that lingers. By the 4th morning, smoke curled from a working chimney. Inside, the cabin was warm, tight, and built better than most in town. Clara stood by the hearth, smoothing her apron. "Never thought I'd see the day," she said. Luke leaned against the doorframe. "You saw it long before anyone else." That's what made it real. She didn't answer right away, just walked over to the shelf, where a carved wooden box rested. Inside were the deed papers, filed clean and legal, her name now etched without dispute. There was another paper too, one with both their names. "Still sure you want this?" she asked, offering the page. "It's not just lumber and walls, Luke. It's everything after." He looked down at the page, then back at her. "I spent 2 winters talking to a grave," he said. "Didn't know a man could still feel the ground shift again. But I do. Right here," he tapped the porch with his boot, "and I don't aim to lose it twice." That afternoon, a quiet wedding was held beneath the tulip tree by the porch. The same blacksmith who once doubted Clara offered his arm to walk her down. Miss Ayers, the school teacher, lent a shawl. Even Mrs. Templeton came, humbled and quiet. Reverend Holloway read from a worn book, voice soft under the wind. Luke didn't wear a suit, just his cleanest shirt, sleeves rolled, hat in hand. "I ain't got fine words," he said, "but I got hands that know how to build, and a heart that finally learned how to stay." Clara smiled, eyes shining. "That's all I ever needed." When the ceremony ended, they didn't kiss with fanfare, just stood hand in hand while the town clapped and the fire inside the cabin crackled to life. That night, as moonlight touched the new roof, they sat on the porch wrapped in a quilt. Below them, Cold Hollow glowed faintly through pine and mist. "I'd still be out there alone if not for you," Clara said. Luke shook his head. "No, ma'am. You'd have made it, but I wouldn't." In the weeks that followed, the garden took root. The tulip tree bloomed brighter than ever. A colt was born in the corral. Sundays still held wary glances, but more nods than before. A new bench appeared outside the church. Folks sat on it without fuss. Inside the cabin, one room stayed empty, for now. But plans for a cradle hung on the back wall, sketched in pencil and hope. One evening, as the last snow melted and the sky turned gold, Clara watched Luke fix the porch rail again. He didn't notice her watching, didn't need to. She stepped beside him and rested a hand on his shoulder. "You think love's something you build?" He looked up, grinned. "No, but I think it's something you hold steady, like a beam, long as you don't let go." She nodded, then looked west, beyond the trees, beyond the hurt they both carried. "Guess even a broken heart can hold nails," she whispered, and the wind, soft through, the pines seemed to agree.